just thinking about this phrase, I don't know much about art, but I know what I like. It's partly prompted by a comment that got that funk made, and I know you've never used that, you probably never used that phrase, got that funk. But I was just kind of thinking around the sides of it, and it led me to this particular, it's probably a cul-de-sac, but never mind. Yeah, I don't know much about art, but I know what I like. It's like that classic cliche statement that somebody would make that we might consider a Philistine, or that we might consider, you know, somebody who's down to earth, or, you know, whatever we think. Somebody who's not educated in the arts, but has taste, you know, like the rest of us do. Everyone's got taste. But that phrase, I don't know much about art, but I know what I like, is so interesting, I think, because what that seems to suggest to me is this really strong, an assumed strong distinction between knowing something and liking something. A difference between knowledge, which is perhaps thought of as being rational and explicit, and you know, the kind of knowledge that you can put into books and videos and that kind of stuff, and then the tacit, implicit sensibilities that are associated with liking and disliking, which are perhaps not so easy to, you know, you consider subjective, you consider internal, you consider to be, you know, of the self and of the body, those kind of things. And as I say, that phrase seems to capture the distinction that we all intuitively have, I suspect. But I'm not sure if it really plays out that way. I don't know much about art, but I know what I like. Because the assumption is, I think, that liking there, that's like the sensibility that leads us to like and dislike things, is you know, is, as I say, in no way connected to the things that you come to know, in no way connected to education or experience. And I think we also know that's not true. You know, because we also talk about having an educated taste, don't we, or an educated palate. I mean, we often use those kind of phrases in relatively elitist circumstances. But, you know, outside of that, I think all of us have got educated tastes, haven't we? All have got educated palates. Very few of us are quite as fond of the things we were fond of when we were kids. You know, when we were kids, I'm guessing I'm speaking for most people here, you know, we liked very, very sweet, sugary foods. We liked objects that were basically platonic solids, triangles and squares and, you know, blocks and balls, those kind of things. And we liked primary colours. You know, you look at any toy shop, you can see the evidence of that. That's what kids go for. They go for, you know, simple distinctions in the complexity of the uncarved block of our world. Kids seem to go for simple distinctions, so they go for primary colours, and they go for easily distinguishable shapes and extreme colour and extreme tastes, perhaps, in terms of certainly sweetness. But that changes, doesn't it, as you get older? You become educated. And that education takes time, I think, and it's not a formal education, it's the informal education of day-to-day life. But it does take time, and it is cumulative. You know, you don't automatically go from only liking primary colours to suddenly having an affection for the post-impressionists. That doesn't happen. What happens is you start off liking primary colours, and then you kind of get some understanding and some nuances in your taste, and you start to like more complex relationships between colours and more complex palettes and more varied palettes, more subdued palettes, and then you find ways of liking different, more complex colour relationships and colour effects. You know, and then after doing all that and various other things happen, and then you might like the post-impressionists, or you might find your old taste for primary colours a little bit infantile. And the same thing for taste. You know, you don't just go from liking sugar straight into liking sushi, do you? I mean, that doesn't happen. You have to go through a whole set of educational processes, experiential and life education processes, where you start to like avocado, or you start to like mushy peas, or you start to like, well, I don't know, different things that kids like, and before you know it, you are liking sushi. But you've built to that point by complexifying and overlaying and contrasting and critiquing almost some of the other tastes. You know what I mean? There's like an implicit almost critique and criticism and set of relationships and analysis going on in all those kind of things, I think, anyway. And that's a form of knowing, isn't it? That's kind of knowing. I mean, And even if it was supported by book learning, you know, even if it was supported by more formal, rational, as I say, explicit, overt forms of knowledge gathering, you know, like reading about stuff, you know, reading about food or reading about art, yeah, it would undoubtedly change you a bit, and as a result of that it would change your taste, because you'd have a more complex set of sensibilities, reflecting a complexification of how you understand the data that your sense is giving you. You know, all the data that your sense is giving you, the bits that the world is being broken up into and recombined into by your senses, is given more complex form, you know, by that educational process, some of which is formal, as I say, some of which is experiential. So I think it's bollocks, basically, I think is what I'm saying. I don't know much about art, but I know what I like, I think, is bollocks. I think you, what's that song? Peter Gabriel, I know what I like and I like what I know. There's a future for you in the fire escape trade. I think it's that. I think it's something about that there anyway. You know, gaining knowledge, explicitly or implicitly, is going to educate your tastes. It's enough of that anyway.